And whose talk this afternoon will be a Delphi study to investigate e-readiness in South African higher education. Over to you.
Hi, everyone. So my topic is a bit of a mouthful, so I'm going to go through it slowly. It is a bit of a mouthful because it was a dissertation topic for my master's in engineering and technology management that I did through the University of Pretoria. And if anyone has done a dissertation before, you know you have to narrow the scope in your topic very consciously so that the scope doesn't grow too widely. So I'm Kasandra, and I'm just going to go through what I actually conducted as a research study in my project. So the term e-readiness more generally refers to the preparedness or level of readiness to make use of information and communication technology. More specifically, looking at e-readiness in the higher education context, e-readiness is a measure of the preparedness of a university or institution to use ICT to enhance the quality of learning, teaching, and research. My specific research problem was that South African universities may be well placed to use some aspects of ICT, but unable to use others for various reasons. And from review of existing literature, it is unclear as to which key focus areas and stakeholders are regarded as important to be e-ready in the South African higher education context. So when investigating e-readiness in South African higher education, I had a few objectives. First, was to look at what are the key focus areas that should be looked at in terms of e-readiness in South African higher education. Who are the key stakeholders for e-readiness in South African higher education? And to develop or propose a model that can be used going forward to investigate e-readiness. So the starting point that I used as my conceptual model in my thesis was a model by Alexander Tarvard, and he proposed this model for higher education institutions. And the reason I chose this model is because it had the following strengths. It was built from existing models in literature with consultation from experts in the ICT field. It was a model designed in 2008, and this was actually the latest e-readiness model for higher education that was available at the time of doing my literature review. The model is reusable, and it uses usage and quality as the inputs to measurement for the model. The key areas that were measured were human capital, infrastructure, and information, and these are used across all types of e-readiness frameworks and are therefore considered most relevant. And they are relatively easily measurable factors that were in this model, and it can be used to provide a quick snapshot of the e-readiness state of an institution. I proposed some changes to Tarvard's model. One was that finance wasn't mentioned in this model at all. So looking at other e-readiness models, I saw finance as an important key factor that should be added. I looked at other key focus areas that were in other e-readiness models and said that there should be some additional focus areas added to the model. There should be additional stakeholders added to the model. And it seemed as if the current model was from a student's perspective only, and that it should take into account other stakeholders' perspective. In addition to this, the measurement for software quantity usage should be made as well. In the Tarvard's current model, they only measure the quality of the software available and not the quantity usage. I also propose that a separate ICT division be used to support ICT teaching and research. So in order to verify these proposed changes that I suggested in my research, I used the Delphi study method, which entails doing a literature review and developing a questionnaire and research design. And the questionnaire is then sent out to a field of experts And the e-readiness experts that I determined in South Africa were actually the IT directors of South African universities, as well as the AS Audit and South African SANREN executives. So that's the CEO from Tenet and from SANREN. So this first round survey was sent out to the IT directors and these executives, and panel consensus was reached on the results. A second round questionnaire was then developed and sent out to the panelists again, and then the final panel consensus was reached around a high percentage consensus. So the expert panel for the first round questionnaire, I received 13 respondents. The questionnaires were actually sent out to the 24 universities, as well as AS Audit, Tenet, and SANREN, but I had 13 responses out of the possible 27. And of these, there were 10 universities involved, as well as Tenet, SANREN, and AS Audit. As you can see, only a few people revealed their name. That's Saki, Joshua, Duncan, and Leon from UCT, Walter Sisulu, Tenet, and SANREN. The rest of them were the IC directors at the universities, but they all chose to remain anonymous. But in total, there were 10 universities. There were 13 respondents to the first round questionnaire, and the results were sent out again to all of the respondents, and we had 9 respondents in the second round questionnaire. In total, I'll just highlight the average experience per panelist. So I looked at the experience in higher education, ICT, and ICT strategy in answering these questions. And the average years of higher education experience were 15.6 years, ICT 21 years, and ICT strategy 12.8 years. So the outcome achieved from the questions that were posed were new definitions for e-readiness and e-learning. Key focused areas were verified. The key stakeholders and their proposed key roles were highlighted. 4 models for e-readiness in South African higher education were proposed. And this came into effect because we realized from the results that Harvard's model was actually focused on teaching and learning only. So there should be other models for research and development, social responsibility, and a combined model of all 3 to conceptualize the entirety of e-readiness in South African higher education. And in addition, 1 model for e-readiness in teaching and learning was tested. Advantages and disadvantages of running e-readiness studies at universities were generated and tested. And further outcomes with regards to the initial considerations is that most of the panelists said that finance is actually an enabler to e-readiness along with other focus areas. So it wasn't regarded as a key focus input into e-readiness studies, but actually an enabler. 69.2% consensus said that there should be a separate ICT division in place, but this was not something that had very high degree of consensus, which was regarded as about 80 to 100% for other questions. So the new definitions that were proposed, in literature you see large overlaps between the terms e-readiness and e-learning. So in my research study, I created 2 separate definitions for these. And e-readiness is therefore the ability of South African higher education institutions to use ICTs to support the primary higher education objectives, which are teaching and learning, research and development, and social responsibility. Whereas e-learning is the ability of South African and higher education institutes to use ICT to support the higher education objective of teaching and learning only. This includes the ability to use ICT for teaching and learning within the classroom and to access educational information online. So at the end of the research study, the key focus areas were verified to be human capital, information, and infrastructure. And the human capital inputs can be broken up into the users and your skilled workforce. The key stakeholders were determined to be funding agencies, university executive and management, IT directors or your chief information officer or IT executive, researchers and scientists, students, lecturers, libraries, support services, and there was 88.9% consensus on external stakeholders. There was one person that disagreed that external stakeholders are important for e-readiness. The key roles that were an emerging outcome from the study were some of those listed here. In my study, I didn't link the stakeholders to these roles, but these were the roles that were important and highlighted as important to achieve e-readiness in your organization. So the improvements that were made to the model, firstly, as I said, the original conceptual model that I looked at was determined by the panelists to be for teaching and learning only. And at the outcome of my research, it was decided that there should actually be separate models for teaching and learning, research and development, social responsibility, and a combined model for all of them. Finance, the second improvement was that finance is not a key focus area, but it is actually an enable to e-readiness outcomes. Improvement 3 is that in the original model, current knowledge of students was the only input that was taken into account for the human capital, but it is actually current knowledge for all your human resources that is important, as well as your skilled workforce, which was a obvious missing factor in that model. The measure for software usage was added to the model based on 75% agreement with the first round questionnaire. And an improvement 5 that was made, you'll see in the model, I've labeled certain parts of the model with numbers which represent supporting factors to e-readiness. So this is the improved model for teaching and learning. The numbers around the model represent, 1 represents IP generation, 2 represents cultural factors which affect your human capital resources, 3 is process-related factors, 4 is a governance factor, 5 effective measurement, and 6 consumerization of IT. So the blue parts in the model are all the improved upgrades that I've made to Harvard's e-readiness model. The second model proposed was an e-readiness model for research and development. So that again was small modifications made onto the conceptual model that I started off with. Then the third model proposed was the e-Readiness model for social responsibility, and that's where aspects from the teaching and learning model and the research and develop model feed back into the community. And the fourth model is a combination of all 3 models proposed. So as quantitative analysis on my research study as well, certain questions where a Likert scale was made use of. That's where the panelists had to rate certain the answers from certain questions from 1 to 5. I actually did quantitative analysis on this to gain agreement or consensus from their answers. So this is an example where I looked at advantages for e-readiness and asked the panelists to select between 1 to 5 their agreement with the statement. So various equations were used and the confidence interval method was used to calculate consensus. So just an example, so if the question was posed, is target development important or considered an advantage of e-readiness, then they would rate either strongly disagree to strongly agree, 1 to 5, and then the equations were used on the outcomes from the panelists, and you could make a statement at the end of the calculation by saying it is shown with 95% score confidence that the mean rating falls somewhere between 3 or 4, where 3 represents neutral and 5 represents strongly agree. And then in addition to that, you could do a percentage frequency calculation to determine whether the consensus was low, medium, or high with that particular statement. So in summary and for conclusion, at the end of my research project, new definitions were proposed for e-readiness and e-learning. The key focus areas and key stakeholders were determined for South African higher education. 4 models for e-readiness in South African higher education were proposed. That is in teaching and learning, research and development, social responsibility, and a combined model of the 3. Emerging areas came out of the study, and these were the advantages and disadvantages of e-readiness, as well as various roles for key stakeholders. And my proposed next steps going forward, if anyone's keen on taking the dissertation forward, I'm not sure whether I have the stamina to do that as yet. So my proposed next steps is that the e-readiness in research and development and e-readiness in social responsibility models need to be tested further. We need to determine how adherence to the outcomes determined can be best achieved and measured, and to do further investigation in how to validate emerging research areas from this research. And those are particularly the advantages and disadvantages of conducting e-readiness studies at your institution and the roles of the key stakeholders. Thank you. Any questions?
Any questions? Any questions?
Wonderful study. Did you? I didn't concentrate and find out exactly. Did you look at teaching and learning strategies of these universities and take that into account, or not really?
Yes. So
you did.
Yes. So as part of my questionnaire, I had divided the questionnaire into different aspects. The one was first aspect was sort of structured as a narrative inquiry section where I just collected information from the panelists to find out what's actually happening at their universities in present. But the presentation that I've done now is focused more on those adaptations that I made to the model. But in my complete dissertation, I have some or sections on what was the feedback that I received from the universities. And from the 10 universities that answered, it's extremely variable as to what they are doing at the moment. A lot of the panelists said that they aren't experts in e-readiness off the bat. So it was very difficult to get inputs from the guys. If people hadn't been working in or were unfamiliar with the term, then they wouldn't even attempt to answer the questions.
I'm just guessing that someone may just criticize the fact that it could be seen that you started from technology again, and then technology is leading pedagogy. But on the other hand, you find that if the technology is not there, that the teachers, the lecturers don't use it because they have an excuse for not using it because it's not there. But when you give it to them, they don't have a need for it because they haven't planned in their curriculums to actually use it. And you know, the old story of what comes first. But I think you've done an excellent study, and you did the cycles on your Delphi. You did 2 major cycles.
Yes.
Okay, good study.
Thanks.
Thank you. Any further questions? Thank you, Kasandra. Thank you.
Thanks.